This week on Life and Faith.
You go through trauma and you're always discovering how deep the fractures go. I'm 20 years later, I'm still experiencing hairline fractures that I didn't know that was there, and they come out. I had to, in order to go back to my loft 3 blocks away from where the tower stood, I had 3 children who became ground zero children. Literally to go home was to face ground zero. And that has defined my certainly a decade of journeying through that trauma.
You couldn't have paid me $1 million a year to do something different.
Why does consciousness exist in the first place?
Forgiveness and reconciliation takes strength.
It was a bit of a culture shock when I hit Sydney.
We hope the truth will out.
This is Life and Faith from CPX. I'm Simon Smart. Well, today, a topic that I'm slightly obsessed with, and one we consider on Life and Faith from time to time. What does beauty, of the sort we find in nature, in art, in literature and film, have to do with faith, spirituality, the religious sensibility? What are the ways that art and faith speak to each other? And how might one enhance the other, perhaps be essential to the other? Well, someone who's spent a lifetime not only as an acclaimed artist but a deep theological thinker and writer is American artist Mako Fujimura. You need to see his artwork to know how beautiful it is. He uses a technique called Nihonga that uses mineral pigments, platinum, gold, silver, that are hand pulverized in preparation. It's slow art, slow in preparation, slow in drying. It takes time, trapping light in between layers of paint. And the result is abstract art with vivid colours that are really stunning. As I say, you need to see it. You can read his books, of course, though. The latest and the catalyst for today's conversation is Art and Faith, a Theology of Making. I spoke with him from his home and studio in Princeton, New Jersey, and began by asking, what does art and beauty have to do with God and faith?
I grew up non-religious. My father is a well-known research scientist. My mother was an educator. I was born in the United States, then spent some time in Sweden, and then Japan, and then back to U.S. So
yeah, you've
so
had quite the journey.
Yeah, and not knowing, exactly who I am either. But formative times were in Japan. But I've always felt, even though I knew nothing about Christianity or religion, really, I always felt that art was spiritual. And I remember even as a child painting and having this energy rush through me. And I thought everybody had this experience, where you feel tapped in, some force or the universe, and you go to middle school and you find out that, no, that's not something you talk about.
That wasn't a conversation in the playground.
No, but I always felt the spirit, and then I didn't become a follower of Christ until I was in my 20s. But the way that happened was I connected that experience with the voice of Christ. It was kind of this direct overlap that I couldn't deny.
That's fascinating. I wonder what beauty of the sort we sometimes get in art might be a hint of the divine, or hints that there might be a creator. It seems like you experienced it that way.
Yeah, totally. It's certainly an intimation that I believe all of us can tap into. And beauty, obviously, I wrote a book called Silence and Beauty to try to explain the Japanese aesthetic flowing into, at least to my mind, something a little bit broader than the Western definition of beauty, which tends to be about perfection and sublime and excellence and all that. Japanese definition involves a deeper sense of longing especially through the experience of sacrifice and death. So the folding cherry blossoms is the most beautiful, rather than a cherry blossoms, blooming at its heights, because there is sadness to that. Japanese call it mono no aware, and it's pathos of things. But Japanese beauty has intrinsic connection to nature, and also deep ties to spirituality, which is a little different than I find Western notion of beauty.
Yeah, so I found that very interesting in your book as well. I wouldn't mind returning to that in a moment, the pathos of life and as it's sometimes reflected in art. But tell me about the ways in which imagination is an important part of being human.
Yeah. So we have healthy suspicion toward imagination. We say, you're imagining that, or, we connect it to fantasy, which is understandable. But really, when you talk to clinical psychologists, they tell you even how we see things just normatively, and how I identify some things, a truck or deer or whatever. The mind is going through this recalibration, severe, complex recalibration, and you understand how complex this is in certain patients who has lost part of the brain. So imagination is actually key to rational thought. It's not fantasy, and there's a difference between fantasy, which is a kind of idol making that we do all the time, actually, but it's different from the faculty of imagination. And there's a lot of overlap between spiritual vision and imagination as well, which writers like William Blake, have accentuated in his poems and his art. So there's plenty of connections. I think after the Enlightenment, when this rational realities really set in as the most trustworthy, then the medieval imagination began to wane. But today, I think you're finding that medieval mindset has been given a resurgence certainly in popular culture and in art, but I think also in theology and philosophy.
Now, you do write about the danger of usefulness and talk about things like art and literature and music as supposedly extra things, non-essential things, but you're trying to argue that actually they are essential. Now, in what way are they essential things?
Yeah, art is absolutely useless, and therefore it's essential to human beings. That's the kind of paradox. Yeah. And art fundamentally is a gift, and it is not meant to be completely commoditized or be useful or pragmatic. I talk about utilitarian pragmatism. Combining two words, utility is good and pragmatism is good, but when you combine those as the basis of judgment toward what lasts, right? So we want things to be enduring, and we are really longing for enduring experiences. But since we believe that the world is a limited resource Darwinian universe, we limit ourselves and truncate that possibility immediately before even we begin. And it's the artist, it's the music, it's theater that transcends that somehow. And you don't have to be a religious person to experience this. There's a reality of transcendence in a sunset. And when we understand human nature and human love, we understand also that when you're taking somebody out on a date, you don't talk about accounting, you don't talk about pragmatics. You don't.
Not if you want it to go well.
Right, exactly. Unless you're dating an accountant, maybe. But really, I mean, it's about beauty, right? You want to have that transcendent experience together, and you want to, because love is ultimately something that is extra utilitarian and extra pragmatic. I mean, it transcends that. Yeah. So love, in order to love somebody, you waste time with that person. You don't put things on the calendar and you don't measure, is this resume building for me or not? No, those that would be the opposite of love. So that everybody knows this, right? But we seem to make decisions, major decisions in institutions and in governments in all sorts of ways, in schools, in education, as if to say, well, the bottom line, the utility is the only thing that matters. That and when really human formation is so much more potentially beautiful than the bottom line.
Now, the Bible talks about God as light. I wondered if that has informed your work as an artist. I'm going to guess that it has in some way.
Yeah. So God is light, and Jesus specifically is light. I'm the light of the world, Jesus says. But God is also in darkness, right? So Psalm 139, even in the depth of hell, God is there, and that's evoking Genesis, because Genesis begins not with light but with darkness, right? God's self-sufficient, all sufficiency, like God was actually perfectly fine in darkness. So why is light necessary? Well, it's necessary for us. Right. And therefore, light is the boundary through which God frames the world for us. Yeah. Now that alone there, that what I just said, you can just think about. We
could spend a long time thinking about that.
No, because it's a flip of how we see value in a way. We only see things that are bright and screaming at us, perhaps to pay attention to, but really human beings have this deep capacity to understand darkness. Yeah. And that's one of the great qualities of being made in the image of God. And when an artist like me, a visual artist, is working with sight and light and so forth. A good example, last night, we had a storm pass through Princeton, New Jersey here, and the lights went out for several hours. And my assistant and I and my wife, we were home eating, and so we decided, instead of complaining about it or waiting for the light to come back on, we would take a candlelight and go upstairs where some of my gold paintings were, displayed, right? Yeah. So we went into this room where one of my gold paintings were, and we just used one candlelight that lit it, sat in front of it, and it was absolutely beautiful. Because Japanese materials, especially 17th century materials that I use, gold, silver, and minerals, pulverized minerals, they are designed for diffuse light, right? It was pre-electricity, right? So it's meant to be refractive, and it's meant to create light through the materials. So at low light, you can actually see it better.
Yes. So there's a sense of that's the point, right? So it's coming out of darkness. And showing something beautiful, not only out of darkness, but out of brokenness, presumably.
Yeah, and this is universally true. Mark Rothko wanted the lights to be lowered because his paintings you can't see in a bright spotlight of a gallery. Yeah. I think many artists are very highly sensitized to especially the shift of light and at the ebb where where the darkness meets the light. That's where your eyes are most active, in a sense. Both technically they're rods and cones, and they call it Purkinje shift. This Dr. Purkinje found out that at certain level of light, when the light is lowered, like at dusk, greens and reds become much brighter to us, sensory perception wise, and that's because our rods and cones are both operating. Cones are the color perceptors, and when the light is too bright, it becomes literally about distinction between dark and light. So really black and white perception in our minds.
This is Life and Faith, and I'm speaking with American artist Mako Fujimura. In his book Art and Faith, he talks about the ancient Japanese art form Kintsugi, which repairs broken bowls, originally teaware, reassembling them with lacquer and then covering that in gold. And the whole idea is that it takes broken things and not only restores them, but makes them more beautiful than the original. Beauty out of brokenness is the idea, which has profound resonance with Fujimura's understanding of his Christian faith.
The Japanese art of Kintsugi is part of the long tradition of tea ceremony, where they venerated the imperfection side. They consider imperfection to be perfect, and at least leads into something more human and more beautiful ultimately. And so Kintsugi is this venerable art form of mending broken pottery with Japan lacquer and gold. And I've been spending a lot of time with the Kintsugi master to collaborate on a project. We're calling it Kintsugi Academy, where we're actually trying to help people understand the process of brokenness. So this is not just the craft of Kintsugi, but it's really understanding that we need to be part of a community that is not only okay with us being broken, but that there is a way that through our hands, by mending bowls ourselves, with this method of Kintsugi that's modified for contemporary times and 3 hours that we have, that somehow this moving your hands to mend something, even if it's for the first time, reconnects the neurons in our brains that's been traumatized and that's been fragmented and splintered, and it's been proven by trauma counselors that this is true of any kind of making. Actually, this idea, the Japanese idea of Kintsugi or Japanese aesthetic, really speaks about, again, this idea of sacrifice or death leading into some wholeness rather than just this disintegration. It is an acknowledgement of the pathos of things, but ultimately it is about beauty, and it is about what truly moves us to be fully human.
Lots more people today in surveys and whatever else, especially young people, describe themselves as having no religion. That's very true, increasingly true in the US. It's true here, lots of places in the West especially. But do you think they are without spiritual yearnings? And where might the artist sort of detect those yearnings?
A friend of mine, a theologian that I know, spent the last 20 years answering that question. And he would go to Sundance Film Festival, where we take our students every year. And these are students mostly raised in fundamentalist churches. So they're not used to watching a Sundance independent film, at all, right? So we have to go through preparation, just warning them, trigger warnings and things like that.
So I shouldn't laugh. Yes.
It's more than trigger warnings because they don't know what's coming,
Right.
So they're absolutely shocked that, somebody may talk about gay life or whatever that the theme may be, right? The human themes. But we always are able to guide these students at the end of, let's say, a week and a half, to see in the film that, they would be boycotting against if it was a fundamentalist church. But something transcendent in them. Why did this filmmaker make a film about faith or whatever that is so counter to our beliefs? And we not only see the film, we talk to the directors and makers, and and they're just as surprised as we are, right? That these whole bunch of Christian students are like inviting them, and they're not boycotting their film as they expect.
Yeah,
they expect culture wars, but instead they get questions.
Yep.
And because we train them to ask good questions, and they go away saying, oh my goodness, this was the best session I ever had at Sundance, because you asked me about the fundamental questions that I was trying to get at, and perhaps didn't have words to do, but the film captures it, right? The filmmakers may not understand what they're doing in a sense, because I know as an artist that's true. Like, I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't want to know what I'm doing. What I'm doing is intuiting, and when you're trusting your intuition, the spirit always takes over. Now, for me as a follower of Christ, I have a huge advantage. I can just trust that process. But a typical art maker or filmmaker who doesn't have that trust will wrestle, and their film becomes about wrestling. That's why the film jumps out as transgressive, because the film captures something very important that most of us are not willing to ask.
Tell me how art and making art has, in a sense, been a healing thing for you.
Yeah.
And I guess your faith alongside that. I know all of us have experienced things in our lives, but I know you were right in the September 11 vicinity, and you sort of lived next to that for a long time. That's a sort of a wound of the city that's in front of you, and you've experienced that. But did your art have something, and your faith have something to say at that time?
Yeah, I think you go through trauma, and you're always discovering how deep the fractures go. I'm 20 years later, I'm still experiencing hairline fractures that I didn't know that was there, and they come out. And I had to, in order to go back to my loft 3 blocks away from where the tower stood, I had 3 children who became ground zero children. I had to literally to go home was to face ground zero. And that has defined my certainly a decade of journeying through that trauma. And then we moved to Princeton so that my former wife can experience some healing from trauma, and that did not solve the problem, but here I am, right? So I am painting and writing everything that I've written, really in the past 5 years has been the result of me painting, first of all, and directly trusting my intuition to find healing, by being honest about the broken realities. And, my pigments, my minerals have to be pulverized. They have to be literally hammered by hand to create prismatic. I'm making my own paint, mixing it with Japanese hide glue and nikawa and water-based. And so by layering these, you're literally working with pulverized materials that by working with them, they eventually become beautiful. And so it's brokenness leading into this beauty. And that's a metaphor of my life. Kintsugi is a metaphor of my life. And my bride and I talk about how both of us have been through Kintsugi experiences. And here we are, how God not only mended us, but poured gold in the cracks, and so having gone through that so many times in my life, I no longer doubt when things happen. And then, of course, 2020 pandemic comes. I remember going to Columbine High School for their 20th commemoration. And one of the brothers of the survivors, he said, I read your books and I want you to know you're welcome here because you are also a survivor. And I never thought about that until that moment. But, after 2020, we're all survivors. Mm-hmm. And now, even if the pandemic is over, that trauma is going to linger. Mm-hmm. And, we have to know, especially our churches and our communities have to have awareness of these lingering effects of trauma and survivor's guilt. Everything that I had to go through as a 9/11, ground zero resident, we're going to be going through as nations, as cultures. So those are things that I try to address in my work. Sitting behind me, monumental paintings called "Walking on Water," because they are elegy to the 2011 tsunami victims, and in Japan, and they became an emblem for the cries of our heart, cries of nature crying out to us as well. And so I continue to deal with those themes, but ultimately I'm doing them to find a language of healing.
It's beautiful. Just one last question. We've talked about the way art and beauty can be evocative of, or perhaps a pointer towards the divine.
Yes.
You need more than that. Like you need to get somewhere too, right? So you think that's taking you on a journey towards what, though? How would you sum that up?
Right. So I write about this in my book as newness. In the Bible, there's a passage, St. Paul says, in Christ, you are a new creation. And that new is kainos, Greek word kainos. And that word has, we translate in English language as new. But when we say new, we think new iPhone, right? And so we translated it as newness because what kainos means is that it's not something like a caterpillar, a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. It's an entirely new species, a new whatever. And so it's not just progressive evolution, but it's a categorically different existence altogether. And the miracle of the resurrection that we Christians celebrate in Easter is not somebody coming back to life, but it is about life itself reconfiguring itself to a new life, or that which we don't understand. But what the Bible tells us is that it looks like human being. It looks like a human being with a wound. Mm. Now, we think about that in context of Kintsugi, right? This is Kintsugi. God in Easter, went through death and suffering on the cross and then death itself, but came back and chose to stay human rather than some superhero with wings, chose to stay human with wounds still visible. And that means that everything that we go through on this side of eternity counts somehow. I don't understand it fully, and I don't dare try to, understand that. But it seriously means that everything we go through today, everything we're suffering from, the questions that we have, the doubts, the anger, frustration, pain, they count, and Christ is present with his tears in those places fully. And we, as we go through that, hopefully in a community that can understand and behold our fractures together, we will be able to journey into the new.
This has been Life and Faith with me, Simon Smart. A big thanks today to Mako Fujimura. His latest book is Art and Faith, A Theology of Making. And if you can find a way to see some of his art as well, I know you'll be glad you did. We'll put some links in the show notes to lead you to where you can see what I'm talking about. On his website, you can see some of his latest work, Walking on Water, which is an elegy to the victims of the 2011 Tohoku Great Earthquake and Tsunami. It's also become an elegy to the climate change crisis, as well as a sort of homage to human resilience in dire circumstances. I recommend it. Next week.
The key to being a humble thinker and someone who actually knows that you don't know everything is that other people are sources of learning for you. This was so brought home to me when I was a teacher, because I went out of university having studied an ancient history degree and got placed into classrooms with performing artists. And I spent most of the first 5 years of those classrooms learning how do performing artists see the world, because I'm nothing like a performing artist. And yet they made my world so much richer.